I wish you're not fuzzy.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley. I'm here with Commissioner Joseph, Commissioner Mims, Commissioner Shaw, and Commissioner Fairchild, as well as the City Manager, Shelley Dickstein, and the Chief of Police, Richard Beal, as well as a multitude of staff in the room that have been working on this for quite some time. I'm very glad that today's event went off without incident, and the hate group that tried to threaten our city is gone. Daytonians demonstrated what we've known all along, that we are a community that can come together in a time of fear and anger and peacefully stand up for our neighbors. I am so grateful to the many dedicated public servants, particularly from Dayton Police and Dayton Fire, who made sure today's events were safe. We appreciate the assistance of many other safety forces who are on hand in case of emergency. I also appreciate the many passionate people who shared their views loudly, but without violence. I recognize that this event has been deeply frustrating for many of our residents. It has helped shine a light on the issues that continue to divide us and all the work we still have to do to make our community a place of opportunity for everyone. Dayton is still too segregated and still too unequal. This is unacceptable and something that we must keep focused on to change every single day. This ugly chapter is over, but it means we have to get back to the real work, making sure that no matter what you look like, where you come from, or who you love, that you can have a great life here in Dayton. I am committed to this work, and I know my fellow commissioners are committed to it as well. I hope all of you will consider joining us. I'm now going to turn it over to our great city manager, who did a great job making sure this went off without incident with her team, Shelley Dickstein.
Thank you, Mayor. So good afternoon. The city has been planning for this event over the past several months. There was a multi-department team assembled to ensure that residents and businesses would remain safe. I'd like to thank Deputy City Manager Joe Parlett, Chief Richard Beal, Chief Jeff Payne, and Major Wiesman for leading this critical response team. Their strategic planning and attention to detail created a safe environment today, and for that I'm immensely grateful. In preparation for this event, we estimate that we have spent roughly $250,000 on personnel costs and almost $400,000 in contract and materials. We'll provide a more accurate figure of costs incurred within the next week or so. The Supreme Court has mandated speech cannot be financially burdened because it offends many. The city provided these security measures to protect our residents and ensure that everyone could safely exercise their First Amendment rights. The police department, in the interest of public safety, determined that these measures were required to protect our residents. Some may be critical of this investment. Unfortunately, in today's world, where individuals are free to open carry unlimited numbers of guns, and where we have seen vehicles driven into crowds of peaceful protesters, we feel that this investment was necessary. I'll now turn it over to Richard Beal to talk about the police operations.
Thank you. So this began with the issuance of a permit by Montgomery County to a group calling themselves the Honorable Sacred Knights. That's the last time you'll hear me mention their name. That permit was granted back on January 29th of this year, and that really began a planning process. We certainly worked very hard to develop a better understanding of this particular group, their activities, and any risk associated with their presence, as well as any those who may choose to also come and counter their voice, and to some degree understandably so. The number of challenges with this particular event and this day included just the sheer prediction of attendance prior to the rally, which was complicated by the use of social media. Multiple events in multiple locations and groups holding events throughout the city, the inability to regulate firearms in protest areas, and merely the complexity of coordinating internal and external resources. So there was a lot to consider in developing an operational plan today, not only for this rally on Courthouse Square, but for all the events occurring throughout the city, as well as providing for the public safety of the entire city throughout this day. One of those things we do know is that this group advised us that many of its members had CCW permits and that they were honored in the state of Ohio and that they wanted to carry firearms on Courthouse Square. We know from those who expressed an interest to come back or come here and counter-protest that they also intended to have firearms in hand. In fact, you saw that. You were there. So I don't need to really underscore that. I'm sure you've got all the video to show it. General preparation and planning, including fire and medical response, emergency planning overall, mutual aid from other agencies, consultation with prosecutor offices, the inclusion of public works. You saw the number of roadways that were required to be closed for this event in the downtown area. Dispatch and communication challenges, media coordination. We met with them even in advance to try to explain how you would have access to cover this event. We knew that you would. We were concerned how you would do that. And I expressed that very candidly. It's not whether you cover it, it's how you cover it that's going to matter. Training required for the personnel who are going to be performing in this environment, legal updates in terms of the potential conduct we're going to face, research, and then also a consent decree that was entered into on May 13th through a litigation initiated by the city of Dayton. Our estimates of attendance at all 4 event locations are the following. Again, these are approximate. We hope to be able to get better definition of attendance through other means, but the best we can determine at this point, in the Courthouse Square area, likely 500 to 600 people. Riverscape appears to be 30, McIntosh Park 200, and then Oak and Ivy Park 30. So after 2 hours of the rally at Courthouse Square, what is the outcome? There were no arrests. There were no use of force by police. There were no injuries to anyone in attendance. There were no citations issued. Generally speaking, from a public safety perspective, very uneventful despite the amount of resources deployed. Support received include the City of Dayton departments. This was, as City Manager mentioned, this is a multi-functional, multidisciplinary team that worked for months to develop a comprehensive plan. Everyone who contributed to this plan deserves credit for its success. The Ohio State Patrol, Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, the City of Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Toledo, some of that which you've already covered, and also support by federal, state, and regional law enforcement agencies. So a lot went into development of this plan, a lot of professionalism and dedication and hard work in its implementation, and the outcome is, all things considered, this was a very safe day for the City of Dayton, not only in the downtown area, but all event venues and in the entire City of Dayton, because it wasn't just what was happening at these 4 events. It was the need and the responsibility to provide public safety for the entire city throughout these events, all of which occurred, I would say, flawlessly. So from that perspective, I'm very, very pleased. I'm very, very grateful for the effort, the energy, the professionalism, the dedication of all the men and women in the Dayton Police Department who helped develop the plan, all of our city leadership and the city manager's office, and actually the mayor and city commission through the city manager's office, and all of the other department directors. We all met together, we worked as a team, and I think we did a really superb job, all things considered. And with that, I'll end my comments.
Questions?
So Mayor, to the chief's point, at least for WHIO, TVR approach has been not covering this hate group, but our community's response to it and impacts on it when it comes to things like public safety. So to that end, I'll ask Nan, you and the mayor and the chief and the city manager, you both want to comment too. You expressed some frustration and anger last night, Mayor, of having to, while it certainly is necessary for public safety, the public funds because of this hate group coming in. So what would you say to that end, and also to some taxpayers who also express frustration? Yeah, it's needed, but we're having to spend public money on this group.
Sure, yeah, I mean, it's certainly frustrating from a, public official standpoint to have a group that's not from your community to come in, have us spend this amount of money to make sure, we put a high price on human life and we want to protect that. But yeah, I mean, to say that we're not frustrated, that this has been a huge time suck for the police department, the city manager, the fire department, every department in the city of Dayton, and that it's, for a group of people that aren't even from our community, yeah, it stinks. But we are grateful that I think made some lemonade here, and the conversations that the community have been very rich, and we're hopeful that that will continue forward as we work to continue this work around equity.
Is the city going to be paying for the other agencies that came here?
Pardon?
Is the city going to pay for the other agencies that came here? No.
Mayor, can you comment about the WDT, by the way?
Hi, Chris.
Can you comment on the businesses who chose to operate under the suggestion of the city of Dayton by closing?
Look, I mean, we don't want to tell people how to do their business, but we appreciate, I think the small business community has been pretty terrific around this issue, from signs, they're interesting signs, unique signs across the city. But I've been mostly impressed by the number of folks that are putting the Dayton United Against Hate in the windows, the impromptu t-shirt selling that happened yesterday. My Facebook is filled with, frustration, but I think a real appreciation about what their community is about and what they want their community to be.
Was there anything to be learned from this activity that took place in our city today?
We're always learning, so we'll always continue to go forward and see, but I think I'm just really proud that the fact that we had no arrests and no use of force and no citations really speaks to the impeccable work of Dayton Police. That I think we were really well prepared, and they did a great job, because that's we wanted something to happen without incident.
Would you be safe in saying that you really do love Dayton?
I think it's safe to say I love Dayton, Chris.
Is there anything to be done to, I mean, this is $650,000 just the city of Dayton spending for 9 people. I mean, that's $72,000 a person. Is there anything that can be done? I mean, we're all for free speech, but to, I don't know, because they can come back, they can just keep applying for permits, and I mean, if they got one a week, that's...
Well, don't give them any ideas.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, I think, the situation in today's environment isn't about our community anymore. It's a national conversation, particularly because of social media and the ability for people to organize. And when you have a law in this state that people can carry assault rifles willy-nilly, that's a danger, and we have to be serious about that. So, we've said the whole time our priority was safety of our community, and I think we've shown that today. I think the city manager has something to say.
I just wanted to add, again, it was not just 9 people. It was 4 events that covered 750 plus people that we were keeping safe. And to the mayor's point, the world has changed greatly. And and unfortunately, we also have, through First Amendment rights, very little way to recapture some of that spent money. But clearly, we will be looking and working with the law department for ways to influence public assembly and costs thereof.
This one's for the chief. Chief Bill, with the police presence, it sort of, to me, reminded me of Cleveland for the RNC or Philly for the DNC, just in terms of the optics and the overwhelming presence. Did you guys take any best practices or lessons either from either of those 2 events, or say like Charlottesville, anything that might have been learned from
Well,
those
not only those 2 events, but from really experience around the country, and certainly I've had my own personal experience from events that happened in Cincinnati during my 25-year career there. We were at the RNC, so we actually were part of the deployment there. We have routinely sent a contingent to all the presidential inaugurations since I have been chief and prior to I've been chief. All of those are invaluable experience in crowd control dynamics and planning. So we certainly have our own rich and deep experience in that regard, but we reached out to a number of agencies, and the media certainly carried the story of our contact with Toledo. I spoke with Chief Kroll personally in my visit there as a part of the U.S. Conference Mayors Committee. So we had a personal conversation. I spoke to Chief Isaac twice during personal visits. So, I reached out to colleagues. I reached out to the interim chief of Columbus, actually was also at the U.S. Conference of Mayors Committee meeting I attended. So clearly we reached out to those who had experience and tried to benefit from that experience.
Chief, can you also talk about the number of officers and some of the assignments they were on, like the breadth of the assignments, so that everyone has everything?
Very limitedly so, I can. I will tell you just by way of understanding that in this 24-hour period, the vast majority of Dayton police officers are working within this 24-hour period. So I would say roughly 350 officers are working at some point during this 24-hour period. We had a number of agencies with specialized resources. You saw mounted patrol from more than one agency, I might add. So clearly, mounted patrol can be extremely effective in moving crowds, particularly crowds that are problematic. And they had a very, very limited role today because we had a very orderly attendance, if you will, at this event. So their use was limited, but clearly that was a resource available. We had individuals who had expertise in crowd control, and that's the Ohio State Patrol. We had bike patrol. In fact, that was a essential element in the RNC. So those are just some examples of the kind of specialized resources that we had available. Some used, some not.
Chief, when do you feel like you can take the sort of metaphorical exhale to say, okay, things are business as usual, back to normal here in Dayton?
So what's the beginning of the question? I'm still exhaling, I think. So.
When do you feel like you can take that exhale and say, okay, things are back to normal as you were here in Dayton, basically?
Well, I think in terms of the mobilization around this rally downtown, certainly much of the individuals who have come have since dispersed. So there's clearly some sense that we're moving beyond this particular event this day. With that said, we have a public safety mission that is 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It never ends. I am extremely pleased that this year we have some remarkable declines in crime, and that's on top of an extraordinary year in 2017. So overall, I am really impressed and very, very hopeful about the future of our city because we continue to see significant improvements in safety. This clearly was a safety challenge for our community and our city. And so it was really important that we took with the utmost seriousness, and you heard from the mayor and city manager, why that was necessary in today's environment. I mean, we're living in a reality that I never envisioned in the beginning of my career 40 years ago. These events didn't happen like this. So it's a different environment. We have to be responsible to the environment that we find ourselves in and not the one we wish we had. We did so and deployed the necessary resources to make sure this was as safe as possible.
Can you say which groups came into town, like in any side of the protest, like if you've identified any specific groups where they came from?
I'm not real fond of giving any one particular group visibility. You heard I mention the name of the group that got the permit one time, and that's the only time you're going to hear me mention their name, quite honestly. And not that I'm being disparaging against anyone else who came down. I just don't think that's my role as chief to be a marketing arm for any particular groups. I just don't. Good call, Chief. Just don't.
My name is Kevin Williams, New York Times. I have a two-part question.
You better go slow then.
The first question, and I apologize if this has been reported and I missed it, but does anybody know why Dayton?
I don't think we have real clarity as to why. Proximity perhaps is one, right? We're not that far away from Madison, Indiana. If you're looking for a major urban venue, we certainly provide that. But do we really have real clarity around that? I don't believe we do. I just don't.
Chief, can you talk about the barriers and everything that's out
I'm sorry, there's a
there?
second part. I didn't remember you had a second part, so.
Thank you. Mayor Whaley mentioned about making lemonade out of this. I wanted to hear more about the lemonade. Was there something good that, I mean, I saw a lot of different groups that normally don't associate with each other out there on the street, and it wasn't violent. I just wanted to hear more about the unifying
I'm gonna let the mayor talk.
effects that this rally may or may not have.
So what we started to do in, I think February or March, the commissioners and I, we had a community meeting, and over 250 people showed up. It was one of the largest meetings that we'd really seen. And people really wanted to talk about what ideas they had for our community. And then our Human Relations Council continued to have small group meetings for anybody that wanted to attend to talk about the issues in our community regarding equity and how we move forward. And what we really heard in those conversations was that people, this is one day, and we're going to make sure, the chief is going to do everything, and the city is going to do everything to make sure people are safe, and that, we were successful on not having any incident. But for us, it was the question: what does our community look like? What are we about? A reaffirmation of our values. I've been really impressed again just how, from the business leadership to neighbors to folks across the city, maybe disagreeing about where they were going to go. Like, we encourage people not to go downtown, but folks may have disagreed about how they were going to talk about it, but they all were talking about the message of what our city's about. And that's one that is about inclusion and diversity. And, this commission has said over and over again that, Dayton is a place, no matter who you love, what you believe, or where you come from, you're welcome in Dayton. And being a welcoming community is something that's very, very important to our values. And so to have this outside force come in, it actually, too expensively, helped city, I think our city residents and people across the region affirm what Dayton is about. And I felt that has gone really well, and I think we'll continue to have that work all through the summer. And really, this commission has been committed around equity and will continue to do that, seeing the outpouring of support from the community.
What happens if they come back on Tuesday and want another permit?
Well, it's a county permit. It's not a city permit, so I can't answer that. Chris?
This would be for the chief. Can you explain or summarize what additional security measures will be taken through the rest of the weekend? And also, there was a counter-protester advising people that the KKK members were staying at the Comfort Inn up on Miller Lane. Does that also become a security point for this evening? Or
False information.
False information.
So somebody really didn't know what they're talking about. Imagine that. In terms of our responsibility is probably public safety, 24 hours a day. We have deployment strategy based on historical experience and also anticipation of any special events. So we will have sufficient police presence throughout the remainder of this weekend as we have had historically. So there's nothing new in terms of the challenges of providing day-to-day public safety staffing. It's what we do every day.
Would you advise Comfort Inn that they...
Pardon?
Would you advise Comfort Inn that they were mentioned in a...
We had made appropriate notification. Yes, we did. We did that immediately. So we made sure that Butler Township was aware that that bad information was being put out by someone.
Chief, can you talk about the escort that was given to the group into the city and out of the city? If you know why that.
I do know. So what's the rest of the question, Chris? I'm sorry.
Would that be typical when a group wants to have a public engagement like they did for them to be able to have security in and out of the city?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it security. I would say expedited entrance and exit, quite simply. Not a minute longer. And that was the intent, and that's how it was executed. That was my call, and I have no regrets.
Then again, the timetable for the barriers coming down, it's been set Sunday. Do we have any?
We think the soft closures will come down today at some time this evening, and then the hard closures will begin to be removed tomorrow. At the same time, the fencing will be deconstructed. So.
Did you have to deal with much fake information on social media?
Did you do? I'm sorry.
Did you deal with much fake information being spread leading up to this, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if fake is necessarily the.
I guess
a lot of people were espousing things, on social media, and the question is it credible? How do you know? So I'm of the, mindset, and I think our personnel are the same, that if someone expresses intent or willingness to engage in violence, we just can't say, they're just blowing steam. We have to take that as being credible until it's proven otherwise. So we take those threats as real. Clearly, we know there was efforts to conceal or make less transparent the number of attendees that would be going to this particular event here. So there is effort to misrepresent what's going to happen and who's going to be there. It's part of the disinformation age we're in, are we not? So it's a challenge for us. It's a challenge for you, right?
You mentioned, Chief, that sort of continued vigilance you'll have throughout the weekend, but given everything you laid out in the rest of the you feel like you made it through this, the main chunk of whatever this event was without incident?
Yes, this was an important threshold to get past, and I was incredibly impressed with the level of detail, planning, effort, literally, again, across the board, throughout all the entire city organization, with all of our law enforcement partners. With that much said, was I certain it would end in the manner that it did, with really no events to speak of? No, I wasn't certain of that. Did I have concern? Sure, I have concern. I'm a chief. I worry. I wake up at 3 a.m. when I was not supposed to get up till 5:45, thinking about these things. So sure, it was a concern, but I also knew we were extremely well planned. And I know how disciplined and how professional our officers are, and I certainly know much of the colleagues I'd be working with throughout the state, having relationships with them over years. And so I was very, very confident that we had a well-developed plan that was going to be executed well, and that would have optimized the best possible outcome.
One more question for you. I found myself wishing I brought my binoculars in some ways, because they were so far. There were two fences. Yeah. My guess was maybe 50 yards. I didn't think it was quite a whole football field away from the street. Maybe you could answer that. But
I don't punt, so I don't know, but go ahead.
Is there a certain level of exposure you have to give them, or it's not quote-unquote free speech? Could you erected 4 walls around them? Yeah. They're marching on the courthouse plaza, but nobody can see them. Is that free speech? Was there a level of exposure? You couldn't hear a word they said, which was fine, but does that question make sense?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things came into play. One is that we certainly knew that Courthouse Square was going to be the event location. We knew that early on, and we knew there was a need to provide a perimeter around that area based on some very concerning intelligence gathered over time that suggests the potential for elevated threat, clearly a significant weapon possession and display, and also individuals who were expressing some interest in engaging in violence related to this event, directed at police and/or those in attendance. So there were reasons to ensure that there was some perimeter security. The second thing that really came into play is that this litigation that was implemented by the law department resulted in a consent decree that the approval of that didn't occur to May 13th, within which defined the area, the designated area, which was discussed with and agreed upon by this group that got the permit to use Courthouse Square. So where they were going to be was defined in that consent decree, and they agreed to that. So that's how that worked out.
How did they treat your officers?
I wasn't there, so I don't have any idea. I really don't. I know we were able to have conversations with them. I think they realized it was that they needed to do so because their failure to comply with any element of that decree, and they were going to be out of there, and they knew that. And they were going to be potentially responsible for any costs related to it. That was a part of what they agreed to. So we actually had to be able to have those kind of conversations, and then we certainly the mechanics of how they would come and leave was going to be important, for overall safety for everyone. So we had to be able to have those conversations. So that standpoint, we had the ability to engage and have the needed conversation that was required.
How much will this change the future handling of big events like this?
It's hard to say. I think that clearly other agencies probably will be interested in the evolution of this plan and its implementation, execution. They're like us. They're going to try to learn from other people. So I think we'll get a fair amount of inquiries from other law enforcement agencies about the approach, the deployment, and lessons learned along the way. And we'll be certainly gracious in sharing that with our law enforcement partners because we share this common interest in keeping our communities and our country safe.
Chief Bill, if I may,
Yeah, Chris.
this is probably more directed toward the city manager, but
I'll be glad to bring her up here.
if anyone up in your group knows, is there any type of insurance where the city could buy an insurance plan where in anticipation for something like this happening, you could buy into it instead of having the taxpayers pay for it?
See, that's above my pay grade. So.
Unfortunately, no, Chris, there is not such an insurance policy.
If I could add to that, will the city budget for something like this in the future if this does happen again?
Well, certainly the city has contingency funding for unexpected expenses, right? And so whether it's an event like this or whether it's an unanticipated emergency, we have contingency funding in place to be able to address that. So we won't go and send a bill to all of the 140 citizens who live in the city of Dayton.
140,000.
I'm sorry, thank you. 140,000. Did I miss a few zeros? 140,000 people who live in the city.
On the same vein, are there any state grants available or anything like that? Have the state kind of took care of Dayton County when during the recent?
We have people, we certainly have people that are, and I'll let the mayor elaborate on that. There are some other elected officials who are working on trying to find funding for us. The Montgomery County did pay about $50,000 or so for part of the event. So they did provide a little bit of funding, and I'll let the mayor talk about some other efforts to bring in federal funding.
So yeah, Senator Sherrod Brown's office has been really helpful, like just looking to see if there's any other places that DOJ could be helpful in offsetting this. And then also there's a discussion that his staff is starting around communities like us to have these folks come from out of town. Is there a FEMA-like way to deal with it? Because it's nobody, you have to protect the First Amendment. So that wouldn't help us, but it's something that's now being discussed, I think, and I think that's an important conversation to be had.
As a part of their agreement or the chief, the expeditious, I forget the term you used, but at the end of that.
Entrance and exit,
Correct.
yes.
At the exit part, was it their understanding or told directly to them, the understanding was, okay, now leave, in so many words?
Yes, and a word.
Please. I think we've killed this, guys, so appreciate your questions and your balanced coverage in this effort. Thank you.
Good job. Good job.